Runaway teen saved Hell's angel daughter, 100 Hell's angels said, "Your family." Now. The gentle patter of rain against the windows created a soothing backdrop as Alyssa curled up on her favorite armchair. The soft beige cushions embraced her while she lost herself in her latest romance novel. Her living room, with its warm cream walls and family photos, had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could pretend the outside world didn't exist. A crack of thunder made her jump slightly, but she smiled and snuggled deeper into the chair. These were the moments she cherished most. Just her, a good book, and absolute peace. The harsh ring of the doorbell shattered her tranquility. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not on such a dreary afternoon. Marking her page, she set the book aside and approached the door cautiously. Years of experience had taught her to be wary of unexpected visitors. Through the peephole, her worst fears materialized. Marcus stood there, his broad shoulders hunched against the rain, his face twisted in a scowl she knew all too well. Her hands began to tremble. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Open the door, Alyssa." His voice carried through the wood, making her flinch. "I know you're in there. I saw your car." She pressed her palms against the door, as if her touch could somehow make it stronger. "Go away, Marcus. I have nothing to say to you." "Don't be like that, baby." His tone softened, but Alyssa recognized the dangerous undertone. "I just want to talk. You can't hide from me forever." "I'm not hiding," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I've moved on. You need to do the same." A heavy thud against the door made her jump back. "Move on!" Marcus's voice turned ugly. "You're my wife." "Ex-wife," she corrected, hating how her voice shook. "We've been divorced for 2 years. That piece of paper doesn't mean anything." Another thud, harder this time. "You belong with me, Alyssa. You've always belonged with me." Rain dripped from his hair and clothes, creating small puddles on her welcome mat. The sight of him through the peephole made her stomach churn. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a rough way, but his eyes held that familiar, frightening intensity. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police," Alyssa threatened, pulling her phone from her pocket. Marcus's laugh was bitter. "Go ahead. By the time they get here, I'll be gone." "But I'll be back, Alyssa. Again and again. Until you realize where you belong." "I belong here, in my own home, living my own life." She pressed her back against the door, gathering strength from its solid presence. "Without you." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of rain. Then Marcus's voice came again, softer but no less menacing. "We'll see about that." Alyssa held her breath, listening to his footsteps as they retreated down her front walk. She waited until she heard his car start and drive away before sliding down to sit on the floor, her back still against the door. Her hands shook as she wrapped her arms around her knees. The peaceful afternoon was shattered, replaced by a familiar fear that crept into every corner of her home. She focused on her breathing, trying to slow her racing heart. The rain continued to fall outside, but it no longer seemed soothing. Instead, it reminded her of tears. Tears she'd sworn she'd never shed over Marcus again. Alyssa's hands trembled as she poured herself a cup of chamomile tea at her kitchen table. The ceramic mug clinked against the saucer, betraying her unsteady nerves. Marcus's visit had left her rattled, and the peaceful home she'd worked so hard to create suddenly felt like a fragile sanctuary. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall, its rhythm matching her racing heartbeat. She wrapped her fingers around the warm mug, trying to draw comfort from its heat. The evening shadows stretched across her clean countertops, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A sharp knock at the door made her jump, spilling tea across the wooden table. Her throat tightened as fear gripped her chest. Had Marcus come back? "Who is it?" she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "My name's Lucas," a young voice answered. "I saw what happened earlier. I want to help." Alyssa hesitated, then moved cautiously toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw a teenager with tousled dark hair and worn clothes that had seen better days. His face was young, but carried a weathered look that spoke of hard times. She cracked the door open, keeping the chain lock in place. "What do you mean you saw what happened?" Lucas shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I've been staying in the area, in that abandoned house down the street." He gestured vaguely behind him. "I saw that guy hassling you. He's been coming around a lot, watching your house." Alyssa's blood ran cold. She hadn't known Marcus had been watching her. The teenager's eyes met hers, and she saw something familiar in them. The look of someone who had seen too much, too young. "Why do you want to help me?" she asked, studying his face. "Because nobody helped me when I needed it," Lucas replied simply. The raw honesty in his voice made her pause. Alyssa closed the door, removed the chain, and opened it wider. Under the porch light, she could see Lucas more clearly. His clothes were clean but threadbare, and there was a certain tension in his shoulders that spoke of someone ready to run at a moment's notice. "You're living on the streets?" she asked softly. Lucas shrugged, trying to maintain a tough exterior. "I manage. Better than where I came from." The words hit close to home. Alyssa knew what it meant to choose the unknown over a dangerous situation. She glanced at the darkening sky and the steady drizzle of rain. "Would you like to come in?" she offered, surprising herself. "I can make you something to eat." Lucas hesitated, and she recognized the internal struggle, the need for help warring with the fear of trusting strangers. "I can sleep on the couch," he said quickly, "just for tonight, and I'll help keep an eye out for that guy if he comes back." Alyssa stepped aside, letting him enter. She watched as he took in her home, his eyes darting to the exits, a habit she recognized from her own past. There was something about his presence that made her feel oddly safer, despite the risk of letting a stranger into her home. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for wanting to help." Lucas gave her a small, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, making him look his age for the first time. Everyone needs somebody in their corner sometimes. The morning sunlight filtered through Alyssa's kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the breakfast table. Lucas sat awkwardly in the wooden chair, his shoulders slightly hunched as he picked at the scrambled eggs on his plate. His oversized hoodie and worn jeans looked out of place against the pristine white tablecloth. Alyssa watched him from across the table, noting how he seemed to make himself smaller, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. The events of the previous night still felt surreal. Marcus's threatening presence, this stranger's unexpected intervention, and now breakfast with a teenage runaway. "The eggs okay?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Lucas nodded quickly. "Yeah, they're great. Thanks." He took another bite, his eyes fixed on his plate. "I haven't had a real breakfast in—" He trailed off, his fork pausing mid-air. Alyssa noticed how he caught himself, carefully avoiding any details about his past. She recognized that guardedness. She'd worn it herself many times before. "There's more if you want seconds," she offered, gesturing to the pan on the stove. The boy's thin frame suggested he hadn't been eating regularly. "This is plenty," Lucas mumbled, but his eyes darted toward the stove hopefully. As Alyssa stood to get him another helping, she noticed how he tensed slightly at her movement. Everything about him spoke of someone used to staying alert, ready to flee at a moment's notice. Back at the table, she poured herself another cup of coffee, letting the familiar aroma steady her nerves. "Lucas," she began carefully, "about last night—" "I should probably get going soon," he cut in quickly, his shoulders tensing. "I don't want to be a bother." "You're not," Alyssa assured him. I want to understand why you helped me." Lucas pushed his eggs around the plate, his fork scraping against the ceramic. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Finally, he set down his fork and looked up at her. His eyes, she noticed, seemed older than his 17 years. "I know who you are," he said quietly, "and I know who your father is." Alyssa felt her breath catch. The coffee cup in her hand suddenly felt heavy. "My dad," Lucas continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "He rode with the angels." under your father's leadership." The revelation hit Alyssa like a physical blow. She set her coffee cup down carefully, afraid she might drop it. Her pristine kitchen, with its gleaming counters and organized spice rack, suddenly felt very far away from the world she'd tried so hard to leave behind. "After he died," Lucas went on, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth, "everything fell apart. Foster homes, one after another. None of them." He shook his head, leaving the sentence unfinished. Alyssa noticed a small tear in the sleeve of his hoodie, the way his dark hair needed a trim, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many nights spent without proper rest. Here was someone else marked by the life she'd escaped, another casualty of her father's world. "How long have you been on your own?" she asked gently. 8 months, 2 weeks, he answered immediately, then looked away, embarrassed by the precision of his count. "But I'm doing okay. I can take care of myself." As Alyssa stood to clear the dishes, her mind raced with questions. How much did Lucas really know? Was his appearance here truly a coincidence? The weight of her past, which she'd tried so hard to shed, seemed to press down on her shoulders once again. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Alyssa's living room floor. She stood by the window, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of the curtain as she peered outside. There he was again, Marcus, trying to look casual as he leaned against a lamppost at the corner of her street. Her heart hammered in her chest as she watched him check his phone, knowing it was just an act. Something wrong? Lucas's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, drying his hands on a dish towel. They'd fallen into an easy routine over the past day, with Lucas insisting on helping with chores despite her protests. "No, everything's fine," Alyssa said quickly, letting the curtain fall back into place, but her hands were shaking as she smoothed down her sweater, betraying her anxiety. Lucas crossed the room and glanced out the window himself. His jaw tightened when he spotted Marcus. "That's him, isn't it? From the other night?" Alyssa nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "He does this sometimes, just watches, waiting for me to let my guard down, I guess." She tried to keep her voice steady, but the tremor in it was unmistakable. "How long has this been going on?" Lucas's voice was quiet but firm. "On and off since I left him." Alyssa moved away from the window, unable to stand the sight of Marcus any longer. "Some weeks are better than others. He'll disappear for a while, and I'll start to think maybe he's finally given up. Then he shows up again, and it all starts over." Lucas watched her pace the living room, his young face serious. "You shouldn't have to live like this." "I don't have much choice," Alyssa replied, sinking onto the couch. "The police can't do anything unless he actually does something. Watching from a public street isn't illegal." They spent the rest of the afternoon in tense silence. Alyssa tried to focus on making dinner, but her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped a pot of boiling water. Lucas quietly took over, showing surprising skill in the kitchen as he prepared a simple pasta dish. As they sat at the dinner table, Lucas finally broke the silence. "He won't get to you, you know." His voice was steady, certain. "I won't let him." Alyssa looked up from her barely touched plate. "Lucas, you're 17. You can't." "I know I'm just a kid," he interrupted, his expression fierce. "But I've learned how to handle guys like him. I've had to." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I mean it, Alyssa. You don't have to face this alone anymore. I'll protect you." Alyssa felt tears prick at her eyes, touched by his determination. Part of her wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't his responsibility, that he was too young to take on such a burden. But there was something about his presence that made her feel safer than she had in months. Maybe this strange twist of fate, this unexpected ally, was exactly what she needed. "Thank you," she whispered, managing a small smile. Though she couldn't quite believe his promise of protection, the genuine care in his voice warmed something inside her that had been cold for far too long. Alyssa was making lunch when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The screen displayed private number, and her stomach instantly knotted. She knew who it was before she even answered. Hello? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Miss me, beautiful? Marcus's voice slithered through the speaker. That familiar tone, sweet on the surface but laced with venom underneath, made her hands go cold. Don't call me again. She tried to sound firm, but her voice wavered. Now, is that any way to talk to your husband? Ex-husband, she corrected, gripping the counter's edge. We're divorced, Marcus. It's over. His laugh was sharp and harsh. Nothing's over until I say it is. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to meet me at Joe's Diner at 7 tonight. No, I'm not. Alyssa's throat felt tight. Then I'll come to your house. Your choice, sweetheart. Either way, we're going to talk. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Alyssa ended the call, her whole body trembling. The sandwich she'd been making sat forgotten on the counter as she sank into a kitchen chair, trying to steady her breathing. Lucas found her there 10 minutes later, still staring at nothing. Alyssa? He approached carefully, like someone approaching a frightened animal. What happened? She told him about the call, her voice hollow. He won't stop, Lucas. He's never going to stop. Lucas pulled out a chair and sat beside her. What did he say? Exactly? He wants to meet at Joe's Diner. Said if I don't show up, he'll come here instead. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking. You're not going, Lucas said firmly. But if I don't, you're not going, he repeated. And if he shows up here? Lucas's jaw set in determination. The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxiety. Alyssa tried to work from her home office, but she couldn't focus. Every car that drove by made her flinch. Every shadow that passed the window sent her heart racing. As evening approached, Lucas positioned himself by the front door. He stood there like a sentinel, arms crossed, watching through the window. The sight of him there filled Alyssa with conflicting emotions: gratitude for his protection, guilt for putting him in this position, and fear for what might happen if Marcus actually showed up. Lucas, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he said, not moving from his post. You took me in when you didn't have to. Let me do this. Alyssa sat on the couch, hugging a throw pillow to her chest. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, each one feeling like an hour. She watched Lucas's silhouette against the fading daylight, thinking about how strange life was. That this teenage boy she barely knew was now standing guard against her demons. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time she thought about Marcus showing up, her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. She couldn't keep living like this, jumping at shadows and dreading every phone call. But the thought of confronting Marcus, of standing up to him, filled her with paralyzing terror. The sun sank lower, painting the room in deep oranges and purples. Lucas remained at his post, unwavering, while Alyssa sat frozen on the couch, caught between gratitude for his protection and fear of what the night might bring. Alyssa paced through her living room, her fingers drumming against her thigh. Sunlight streamed through the windows, but it did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in her bones. Her father's number was still in her phone. She'd never deleted it, even after all these years of staying away from his world. She paused at the mantel, picking up an old photo of herself as a child. Her father stood beside her, both of them smiling. Back then, she hadn't understood what the patches on his leather vest meant, or why other people crossed the street when they saw him coming. The memory made her stomach turn. You okay? Lucas asked from the doorway, his voice gentle. Alyssa set the photo down carefully. Just thinking about options we don't have. Your dad? Lucas leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Despite his youth, his eyes carried an old soul's wisdom. I swore I'd never go back to that life. Alyssa moved to the window, scanning the street out of habit. The violence, the constant fear. I watched my mother live with it until the day she died. Lucas shifted his weight. Sometimes protection isn't a bad thing. The kind my father offers comes with strings attached, thick, heavy chains that never let go. She walked to the kitchen, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket, like a stone weighing her down. In the kitchen, she pulled out the phone, staring at the screen. Her father's number seemed to pulse there, tempting and terrifying all at once. One call could end this nightmare with Marcus. One call could also drag her back into a world she'd fought so hard to escape. "You don't have to do this alone," Lucas said, following her into the kitchen. "Whatever you decide." A loud crash cut him off. The front door splintered inward, wood fragments scattering across the floor. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face twisted with rage. Two men flanked him, their intentions clear in their stance. Before Alyssa could move, Lucas was already there, positioning himself between her and the intruders. His shoulders were squared, his stance ready despite being severely outmatched. "Well, isn't this sweet?" Marcus sneered, taking a step forward. "Got yourself a little guard dog, Alyssa?" "Get out!" Lucas's voice was steady, controlled. "You're not welcome here." Marcus's face darkened. "Listen, kid. I don't want to hurt you, but I will. Step aside." "No." Lucas didn't budge. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, but his voice remained level. "You're not touching her." Alyssa's heart hammered in her chest as she watched Marcus's expression shift from amusement to fury. She could see the violence building in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched. "Last chance, boy," Marcus growled, taking another step forward. "Move, or I'll make you move." Lucas lifted his chin, standing his ground. "Try it." Lucas stood his ground, his lean frame blocking the doorway as Marcus towered over him. The evening light cast long shadows across the entry hall, making the scene feel even more ominous. Alyssa watched from the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Get out of my way, kid," Marcus snarled, his breath heavy with alcohol. "This is between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," Lucas corrected, his voice steady despite his youth. "And she doesn't want you here." Marcus's face twisted with rage. He lunged forward, trying to shoulder past Lucas, but the teenager was quicker than he looked. In one fluid motion, Lucas shifted his weight, using Marcus's momentum against him. The older man stumbled, catching himself against the wall. "I said leave," Lucas repeated, his voice dropping lower. There was something in his tone that made Alyssa shiver, a hint of steel she hadn't heard before. Marcus straightened up, his eyes darting between Lucas and Alyssa. "You think this kid can protect you?" he sneered at her. "You really think you're safe?" "Safer than I ever was with you," Alyssa found her voice, though it trembled slightly. Marcus took another step forward, but Lucas didn't budge. Instead, the teenager reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. "I've already called the cops," he said quietly. "They're on their way. Your choice how this goes down." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. He backed away slowly, pointing a finger at Alyssa. "This isn't over," he growled, but the threat sounded hollow now. They watched as Marcus stumbled down the front steps and disappeared into the growing darkness. Alyssa's legs felt weak, and she sank into a kitchen chair. Lucas closed and locked the door before joining her. "How did you know what to do?" she asked, studying his face. "Where did you learn to handle someone like that?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the kitchen table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something, Alyssa. About why I'm really here." She felt her chest tighten. "What do you mean?" "Your father sent me," Lucas said, meeting her eyes. "He's been watching out for you, even though you left. He knew Marcus was causing trouble, so he asked me to keep an eye on you." The words hit Alyssa like a physical blow. She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. "My father? You're working for my father?" "Not working exactly," Lucas hurried to explain. "He knew about my dad, about what happened to me after. He offered me a chance to help someone, instead of just running." Alyssa wrapped her arms around herself, trying to process this revelation. All this time she thought she'd escaped her father's world, but it had followed her anyway. The protection she'd felt with Lucas suddenly felt tainted, complicated by old loyalties and unspoken debts. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, hating how her voice cracked. "Would you have let me stay if I had?" Lucas countered softly. Alyssa looked at him, really looked at him. Despite everything, she saw the same kind eyes that had offered her help when Marcus first showed up. The same determined set to his jaw when he stood between her and danger. But now she also saw the weight of secrets he'd been carrying, the careful way he'd positioned himself in her life. She sank back into her chair, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed new life starting to crack. Her father's influence had found her after all, wrapped in the unexpected package of a teenage runaway who'd become her protector. Alyssa sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The evening shadows stretched across the room, and the tick of the clock on the wall seemed impossibly loud. Lucas sat across from her, his shoulders hunched, looking younger than his 17 years. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long has my father been watching me?" Lucas shifted in his chair, his fingers picking at a loose thread on his worn jacket sleeve. "Since you left," he admitted. "He never stopped keeping tabs on you." Alyssa closed her eyes, memories, washing over her like a tide. The night she'd packed her bags and walked away from the compound, from the leather-clad men who'd been her family, from the constant rumble of motorcycles that had been the soundtrack to her childhood. She'd thought she'd made a clean break. But why you? She opened her eyes, studying Lucas's face. "You're just a kid." "I can handle myself," Lucas said, straightening up. "And I know what it's like to need someone watching your back. After my dad died..." He trailed off, swallowing hard. "Your father knew I'd understand what was at stake." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the room through the curtains. Alyssa stood up, carrying her cold tea to the sink. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured it out. "I left that world for a reason, Lucas. The violence, the constant fear." She turned back to face him. "I wanted something different." "I know," Lucas said softly. "But your father, he's not trying to pull you back in. He just wants to make sure you're safe. That's all I'm here for." Alyssa leaned against the counter, studying the young man who'd somehow become her protector. Despite his rough exterior, there was a gentleness in his eyes that reminded her of herself at that age, before she'd understood what her father's world really meant. "Marcus won't stop," Lucas continued. "And there might be others. Your father knows that. He's just trying to protect you in the only way he knows how." Alyssa walked to the living room window, pulling back the curtain slightly. The street was quiet, peaceful. But she knew better now, knew that somewhere out there, her father's men were watching, ready to step in if needed. She pulled her phone from her pocket, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she'd never deleted, but never used. Her father's number. The same one she'd had memorized since she was 12, just in case of emergencies. Her thumb hovered over it as memories flooded back. Her father teaching her to ride a bike, his leather cut gleaming in the sun, the way he'd kiss her forehead before heading out on runs. The first time she'd seen him hurt someone, really hurt them, and realized what kind of man he truly was. The phone felt heavy in her hand as she stared at the number. 7 simple digits that could reconnect her to a world she'd fought so hard to escape. Behind her, she could hear Lucas's quiet breathing, waiting to see what she would choose. Alyssa's hand trembled as she held the phone to her ear. Each ring echoed through her chest like a thunderclap. On the 4th ring, a gruff voice answered, "Hello, Alyssa." Her father's voice hadn't changed, still as cold as steel, yet somehow familiar enough to make her throat tighten. "Dad," she managed, "it's been a long time." His words carried the weight of accusation. "Lucas tells me Marcus is causing trouble." Alyssa glanced at Lucas, who sat on her couch, pretending to watch TV while obviously listening to every word. "I can handle Marcus," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Like you handled him before? Her father's tone sharpened. When he put you in the hospital? The memory of that night flashed through her mind. The bruises, the broken ribs, the taste of blood in her mouth. She gripped the phone tighter. That was different. I'm different now. You need to come home, Alyssa. It wasn't a request. The compound is safe. My men can protect you. The compound isn't safe, she countered, heat rising in her voice. It's just a different kind of danger. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Through the phone, she could hear the familiar sounds of the compound. Motorcycles revving, men's voices, the clinking of bottles. You're my daughter, he said finally. Everything I've built, everything I've done, it's all been to protect our family. Family? Alyssa laughed, but there was no humor in it. Running guns? Starting gang wars? That's not family, Dad. That's survival of the fittest, and I want no part of it. The world isn't as black and white as you think, girl. His voice grew colder. You can't just walk away from who you are. Watch me, Alyssa said, her fingers white-knuckled around the phone. I already did it once. I'm not that scared little girl anymore, running from Marcus or anyone else. I built my own life, my own peace. I won't let anyone take that from me. Not Marcus, and not you. The silence that followed felt like ice. When her father spoke again, his voice was distant. You'll always be my daughter, and I'll always protect what's mine, whether you like it or not. The line went dead. Alyssa set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. She turned to Lucas, who had given up pretending not to listen, and was watching her with concern. Thank you, she said softly, for trying to protect me. But I can't do this anymore. I can't have one foot in that world, and one foot out. It has to be all or nothing. Lucas sat up straighter. What are you saying? I'm saying you should go. Live your life. You don't owe my father anything, and you certainly don't owe me anything. No. Lucas stood up, his jaw set in a stubborn line. I'm not leaving. Lucas, this isn't about your father anymore, he interrupted. This is about me choosing to stay. I'm not here because someone told me to be. I'm here because I want to be. Alyssa looked at him. Really looked at him. Despite his youth, there was a steadiness in his eyes that reminded her of herself at that age, determined to forge her own path. You can't protect me forever, she said quietly. Maybe not, Lucas agreed. But I can try today, and tomorrow, and the day after that. Your father might have sent me here, but I'm staying because I choose to. The morning sun filtered through Alyssa's kitchen window as she made coffee, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. 3 days had passed since her conversation with her father, and the house felt different now, like a fortress under siege. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, his eyes constantly darting to the windows, watching. You should eat something, Alyssa said, sliding a plate of toast across the table. Lucas shook his head. Not hungry. His shoulders were tense, and dark circles had formed under his eyes from lack of sleep. Alyssa sighed and sat down across from him. You can't keep this up forever. You need rest. I'm fine, he insisted, but his voice betrayed his exhaustion. Throughout the day, Alyssa tried to focus on her work, responding to emails and making phone calls. But every car that drove past made her jump, and every shadow at the window sent her heart racing. Lucas paced between rooms, checking locks and peering through curtains. By evening, the stress had worn them both down. Alyssa's hands shook as she washed the dishes, and every little noise made her flinch. A dog barking in the distance, a car door slamming, the wind rattling a loose shutter. I saw him drive by earlier, Lucas said quietly, joining her in the kitchen. 3rd time today. Alyssa's stomach clenched. What does he want? Why can't he just leave me alone? Because guys like Marcus don't give up, Lucas replied, his voice hard with experience. They keep pushing until someone pushes back harder. That night, as they sat in the dimly lit living room, A car's headlights swept across the walls. Alyssa froze, her breath catching in her throat. Lucas was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "It's him," he confirmed, his jaw tight, just sitting there, watching. Alyssa hugged herself, feeling cold despite the warm evening. "Maybe I should call the police." "And tell them what?" Lucas turned to face her, his expression grim. "That your ex is parked on a public street? That he's driving by? They won't do anything until he actually does something. And by then—" He trailed off, but Alyssa understood what he meant. The next morning, Alyssa found a note in her mailbox. Her hands trembled as she read Marcus's messy handwriting. "You can't hide forever." Lucas found her standing in the driveway, the note crumpled in her fist. "We can't keep doing this," he said firmly. "Living like prisoners in your own house, jumping at every sound, waiting for him to make his move." "The police," Alyssa started. "Won't help," Lucas cut her off. "Not really. They might take a report, maybe talk to him, but you know Marcus. He'll just wait them out, play nice until they're gone, then come right back." Alyssa sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Lucas was right. They couldn't continue like this. The constant vigilance, the fear, the waiting, it was slowly crushing them both. "He's not going to stop," Lucas said softly, sitting across from her. "Not until someone makes him stop. A restraining order won't scare him. Police warnings won't deter him. He'll keep coming back, keep pushing, keep threatening, until—" "Until what?" Alyssa whispered, though she already knew the answer. "Until you make a stand," Lucas replied. "One way or another, this has to end." The sound of breaking glass shattered the evening quiet. Alyssa jumped from her seat on the couch, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lucas rushed to the window, his face hardening at what he saw outside. "It's Marcus," he said, his voice tight, "and he's not alone." Through the curtains, Alyssa could see several dark figures moving across her front lawn. The beam of flashlights cut through the darkness, and she heard the distinct sound of someone kicking her garden gnomes. "Get away from the windows," Lucas warned, pulling her back. "They're trying to draw us out." Marcus's voice boomed from outside. "Alyssa, get out here now!" The raw anger in his voice made her shiver. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." More glass shattered. This time, it was her car's windshield. The alarm blared through the night, its wailing only adding to the chaos. Alyssa's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. "What are you doing?" Lucas asked, positioning himself between her and the front door. "Calling the police," she whispered, but her fingers froze over the keypad as another crash echoed through the house. Someone had thrown a rock through her kitchen window. "Police won't get here fast enough," Lucas said, his eyes darting between the windows and doors. "They're getting bolder. Marcus is drunk. I can hear it in his voice. He's not thinking straight." The sound of splintering wood made them both jump. They were trying to break down her back door. Alyssa's breath came in short gasps as panic threatened to overwhelm her. "Come on out, baby," Marcus called, his words slurring slightly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You know you belong with me." Lucas grabbed a baseball bat from behind the couch. He'd stored it there days ago, just in case. "We need to do something," he said. "Now." Alyssa's phone felt heavy in her hand. She knew what she had to do, even though every fiber of her being resisted it. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she hadn't used in years. Her father answered on the second ring. "Alyssa." His voice was cold, distant, exactly as she remembered it. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Another crash from outside made her flinch. "I need help. Marcus is here with his gang. They're trying to break in." There was a long pause on the other end. Alyssa could hear shouting outside, could hear Marcus getting more agitated by the second. The back door wouldn't hold much longer. "Please," she begged, swallowing her pride. "I know I walked away. I know I said I never wanted anything to do with the club again. But he's going to hurt us. He's going to hurt Lucas." The boy is still with you? Her father's tone shifted slightly. Yes, she said, watching as Lucas braced himself against the door. He's been protecting me, but there are too many of them. Another pause, this one shorter. Give me the address. Alyssa rattled off her location, her voice shaking. Outside, she could hear Marcus getting closer to the door. Stay inside, her father commanded. My men will handle it. And Alyssa? Yes? We'll talk about this later. The line went dead. The rumble of motorcycles filled the quiet suburban street. Through her living room window, Alyssa watched as a line of Hell's Angels bikers rolled up, their chrome gleaming under the streetlights. Her father's men, she recognized a few faces from her past life. Get away from the window, Lucas said, pulling her back. His voice trembled slightly, but his grip was firm. Marcus and his crew stood their ground in her front yard, their faces twisted with anger. The night air crackled with tension as the bikers dismounted, their leather cuts bearing the familiar death's head patch that had haunted Alyssa's childhood. Last chance to walk away, one of the angels called out, his hand reaching inside his jacket. The metallic glint of a gun made Alyssa's stomach lurch. Marcus sneered. This isn't your business. The woman belongs to me. Wrong answer, another angel growled. Everything exploded at once. The sound of fists hitting flesh mixed with angry shouts as the two groups clashed in her front yard. Alyssa pressed her hands against her mouth, watching in horror as the violence she'd tried so hard to escape played out before her eyes. Lucas stood beside her, his body tense. We should get away from the windows, he repeated, more urgently this time. A gunshot cracked through the air. Someone screamed. Alyssa couldn't tell who was winning. It was just a blur of leather, denim, and flying fists. Her perfectly maintained lawn had become a battlefield, and she felt sick knowing it was all because of her. This is what I never wanted, she whispered, her voice breaking. This violence, this life. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. You think this changes anything? He shouted toward the house. You'll always be looking over your shoulder, Alyssa. Another shot rang out, followed by the blessed sound of police sirens. Red and blue lights painted the walls of her living room as squad cars screeched to a halt outside. Police! Everyone freeze! The fighting stopped almost instantly. Some of the angels melted away into the darkness, but others stood their ground, dropping their weapons. Marcus tried to run, but was tackled by two officers. As they cuffed him, he thrashed and screamed. This isn't over, he yelled as they dragged him toward a patrol car. You hear me, Alyssa? It's never over. Alyssa watched as the police restored order to her street. Her legs felt weak, and she sank onto her couch, the adrenaline draining from her body. Relief washed over her. Marcus was finally in custody. But dread settled in her stomach, too, knowing that violence would always follow her, one way or another. She looked at Lucas, who stood frozen by the window. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly. He'd been so brave, so protective, but he was still just a teenager who'd seen too much violence in his young life. Are you okay? She asked softly. Lucas nodded, but his eyes were distant. Yeah, he managed. I'm fine. But Alyssa could see the truth. He was as shaken as she was. Through her window, she could see the police interviewing witnesses, taking statements. Her front yard was a mess of scattered evidence markers and trampled grass. The peaceful home she'd worked so hard to create had been shattered by the very world she'd tried to leave behind. The flashing red and blue lights of police cars finally faded into the distance, leaving Alyssa's street in an eerie quiet. Inside her kitchen, she pressed a cold compress against Lucas's swollen cheek. He winced but didn't pull away. You shouldn't have gotten involved, Alyssa said softly, examining the bruise forming under his eye. This isn't your fight. Lucas managed a weak smile. Couldn't just stand there and watch. He shifted in his chair, grimacing as he held his side, where one of Marcus's men had landed a solid punch. Alyssa's hands trembled as she cleaned a small cut above his eyebrow. I've seen enough fighting to last a lifetime. Growing up with the angels, she shook her head. Every day, there was some new battle, some new enemy. I get it, Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. After my dad died, I bounced between foster homes. Some were okay, others. He trailed off, his eyes distant. The streets seemed safer sometimes, you know? At least there, I knew what I was dealing with. Alyssa set down the compress and sat across from him at the kitchen table. The overhead light cast shadows across their faces, making them both look older than their years. I tried so hard to stay away from violence, Lucas continued, running his fingers through his messy hair. Watched my dad get consumed by it. The angels, the fights, the constant looking over your shoulder. It changes you, makes you hard inside. He looked up at Alyssa, his eyes glistening. I don't want to become that. Alyssa reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You won't. You're nothing like them, Lucas. You protect people because you care, not because of power or control. Sometimes I'm scared, he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. Scared that maybe violence is all I know, that maybe I'm just fooling myself thinking I can be different. Hey, Alyssa said firmly, waiting until he met her eyes. Look at what you did tonight. You stood up to protect someone, not to hurt anyone. That's different. That matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the events of the night settling around them like dust after a storm. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time in this quiet aftermath of chaos. Alyssa finally broke the silence. Thank you, Lucas. Not just for tonight, but for everything. For watching over me, for caring enough to step in. Her voice wavered with emotion. I've been alone in this for so long. Lucas gave her a small, genuine smile. We're not alone anymore, right? They shared a look of understanding. Two souls who had seen too much darkness, but still fought for light. The kitchen felt warm and safe, a shelter from the storm outside. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but for now, this moment of peace was enough. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Alyssa prepared coffee, her movements slow and deliberate. The events of yesterday still weighed heavily on her mind. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, carefully holding his coffee mug with bruised knuckles, when Alyssa's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and froze. Her father's number. I should take this, she said quietly, stepping into the living room. Her finger hovered over the answer button for a moment before she accepted the call. Alyssa? Her father's gruff voice filled her ear. Marcus won't be bothering you anymore. My men made sure of that. Alyssa sank into her armchair, clutching the phone tightly. I appreciate the help, Dad, but nothing, he cut in. This proves what I've been saying all along. You need protection. Real protection. The kind only family can provide. She closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of his expectations pressing down on her. Dad, please. The angels are your family, Alyssa. Always have been. This lone wolf act of yours, it's got to stop. You've seen what can happen. Through the doorway, she could see Lucas pretending not to listen, but his posture was tense, alert. He dabbed at his split lip with a napkin, a visible reminder of yesterday's violence. I've built a life here, Alyssa said, her voice stronger now. A normal life, away from all the fighting and... normal? Her father's laugh was harsh. That normal life of yours nearly got you killed. Marcus might be gone, but there will always be others. You're my daughter. That makes you a target. Alyssa's free hand clenched into a fist. I won't go back to that life. I can't. You're being stubborn. The club can protect you, give you everything you need. A proper home, security. A proper home? Alyssa's voice cracked. Like the one where I grew up watching people get beaten? Where every night I wondered if you'd come home alive? She took a shaky breath. I know you think you're helping, Dad, but I won't bring that darkness back into my life. Silence stretched between them. In the kitchen, Lucas had given up pretending not to listen, his worried gaze fixed on her. "You're making a mistake," her father said finally, his tone cold. "The world out there? It's not kind to people who stand alone." "I'm not alone," Alyssa replied firmly, "and I'm not coming back. Not now. Not ever." The line went dead. Alyssa lowered the phone, her hands trembling, slightly. When she looked up, Lucas stood in the doorway, concern etched across his bruised face. He'd heard everything. Her father's demand for her return, her refusal to go back to the angels, the underlying tension in every word. "You okay?" he asked softly. Alyssa nodded, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "He wants me to come home. Says it's the only way to stay safe." Lucas shifted uncomfortably, wincing at the movement. "And you're sure about saying no?" "More sure than I've ever been about anything." Alyssa set her phone down, pressing her palms flat against her thighs to stop their shaking. "I can't go back to that life, Lucas. I won't." The days following Marcus's arrest brought an unfamiliar sense of calm to Alyssa's home. She found herself settling back into her routine, though now with Lucas as a constant presence. The morning sun would find them sharing breakfast, their comfortable silence broken only by the clink of spoons against cereal bowls and the occasional comment about the weather. Lucas had taken to helping around the house, fixing the loose cabinet door in the kitchen and tending to the small garden in the backyard. His bruises from the fight were fading, turning from angry purple to softer yellows and browns. Sometimes Alyssa would catch him lost in thought while watering the flowers, his face peaceful in a way she hadn't seen before. "These tomatoes might actually make it," he said one afternoon, carefully examining the tiny green fruits forming on the vines. "My mom used to grow them too." It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother, and Alyssa treasured these small glimpses into his past. Their shared experiences of loss and fear had created a bond that went beyond mere friendship. They were family now, in their own way. The neighborhood felt different too. The tension that had hung in the air like a storm cloud had lifted. Alyssa found herself taking evening walks again, with Lucas by her side. They'd talk about simple things, movies they wanted to watch, books they'd read, dreams they had for the future. One evening, they sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Lucas had made hot chocolate, complete with mini marshmallows he'd insisted on buying at the grocery store. "You know," Alyssa said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug, "I never thought I'd feel this peaceful again." Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's nice, isn't it? Just normal." That night, Alyssa went to bed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The house was quiet, secure. She could hear the soft whir of the ceiling fan and, occasionally, the gentle creaking of floorboards as Lucas moved around in his room down the hall. But peace, as they both knew, was a fragile thing. It was just past midnight when she heard it. A cry from Lucas's room. She was out of bed in an instant, her heart pounding as she rushed down the hallway. She found him sitting up in bed, his t-shirt soaked with sweat, eyes wide with fear. "Lucas?" she called softly from the doorway. "Are you okay?" He looked at her, his breathing ragged. I had a dream about the gang. They found us and..." He ran a shaking hand through his hair. It felt so real. Alyssa moved to sit on the edge of his bed, careful to give him space. In the dim light from the hallway, she could see how young he looked, how vulnerable. "I keep thinking about how this can't last," he whispered. "The quiet, the peace. Something always happens, doesn't it? That's how it's always been." Alyssa sat there, watching him struggle to compose himself. She wanted to tell him everything would be fine, that they were safe now, that Marcus couldn't hurt them anymore. But the words stuck in her throat. Because deep down, she shared his fears, knew the fragility of their current peace. Instead, she just sat with him in the darkness, both of them awake and afraid, sharing the weight of their uncertainties in silence. The evening air was cool as Alyssa and Lucas sat on her back porch, watching the sun paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges. 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate sat between them, their warmth a comfort against the growing chill. Lucas wrapped his oversized sweater tighter around himself, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Sometimes I imagine just disappearing, Alyssa said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Moving somewhere far away, where no one knows us. Maybe to a small town near the ocean. Lucas's face brightened at the thought. I've never seen the ocean before, he admitted, a hint of wonder in his voice. What's it like? It's beautiful, Alyssa smiled, remembering a trip from her childhood, before everything got complicated. The waves never stop moving, and the air tastes like salt. There are these little beach towns where everyone knows each other, but they mind their own business, you know? That sounds nice, Lucas said, his voice wistful. We could get one of those houses with a wraparound porch, maybe even a dog. He paused, realizing what he'd said. I mean, if you wanted to. Alyssa reached over and squeezed his hand. I'd like that, Lucas. You and me, far away from all of this. The words felt right, but something heavy settled in her stomach. But Marcus, he's in jail, Lucas reminded her, though his voice lacked conviction. Alyssa shook her head, her shoulders tensing. People like Marcus, they don't just go away. They find ways to keep hurting you, even from behind bars. She took a shaky breath. Sometimes I feel like I'll never really be free of him. Like he's this shadow that follows me everywhere, waiting for the right moment to destroy everything I build. Lucas shifted closer, his presence steady and reassuring. You're not alone anymore, Alyssa. Whatever happens, we face it together. They sat in silence for a while, watching as the stars began to appear one by one. Alyssa tried to hold on to the peace of the moment, but Marcus's last words kept echoing in her mind. This isn't over. She knew in her heart that he meant it. Maybe we should look into those beach towns, Lucas suggested, trying to lift the mood. Just to see what's out there. We could start fresh, both of us. Alyssa managed a small smile, allowing herself to imagine it. A new beginning sounds perfect right about now. They stayed up late into the night, planning their escape, dreaming of a future free from violence and fear. It felt good to hope, even if reality kept trying to creep in at the edges of their dreams. The next morning arrived with harsh clarity. Alyssa's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her hands trembled as she read the message. Marcus made bail. Watch your back. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the kitchen counter. Lucas looked up from his breakfast, instantly alert at her expression. Alyssa? What is it? She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. All their dreams of escape suddenly felt like smoke, disappearing into the morning air. The walls of her carefully built sanctuary began to close in, and the safety she'd started to feel crumbled like sand between her fingers. Lucas picked up the phone, his face hardening as he read the message. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and in that moment they both knew their brief peace had come to an end. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. Alyssa was walking to her car when she noticed the slashed tires, all 4 of them flat against the pavement. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone to call work, explaining she'd be late. Lucas appeared beside her, his face grim. It was Marcus. I saw his guys hanging around here last night, but they were gone before I could do anything. That was just the beginning. Over the next few days, Marcus's presence grew like a dark cloud over their lives. His gang members would cruise past her house at all hours, engines revving, music blaring. Sometimes they'd stop and stare, making sure she saw them watching. At the grocery store, 2 of Marcus's men followed her through the aisles, never getting close enough to touch her, but staying near enough to make her heart race. Lucas tried to stand between them, but they just laughed, knowing they had the upper hand. You can't hide forever, sweetheart, one of them called out as she hurried to her car. Marcus says hi. Back home, Alyssa's hands shook as she put away the groceries. Lucas watched her from the doorway, his young face etched with worry. We should call the police, he suggested, not for the first time. They can't do anything, Alyssa replied, her voice hollow. Not without proof, and Marcus is too smart for that. The breaking point came 3 days later. Alyssa was leaving work when she found Marcus himself leaning against her car, that familiar, cruel smile on his face. Her blood turned to ice. "Miss me?" he asked, pushing off the car and taking a step toward her. Alyssa backed away, her heart hammering in her chest. "Stay away from me, Marcus!" "Or what?" He laughed, the sound sending chills down her spine. "You'll call Daddy's gang again? How's that working out for you?" She turned and ran, her heels clicking against the pavement as she hurried back into the building. Once inside, she locked herself in the bathroom, sliding down against the wall as panic overtook her. When she finally made it home, hours later in a borrowed car, she found Lucas pacing the living room. "Where were you?" he demanded, worry clear in his voice. "I've been calling." "He was at my work," Alyssa whispered, collapsing onto the couch. "Marcus, he was just there, waiting for me." Lucas sat beside her, his face hard with anger. "This has to stop." Alyssa looked around her home, the place that had once felt like a sanctuary. Now it felt like a prison, with danger lurking around every corner. Marcus had succeeded in making her feel trapped, helpless, and alone. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and scrolled to her father's number. Each ring felt like an eternity until his gruff voice answered. "Daddy," she said, her voice breaking, "I need your help." "You ready to come home?" he asked, his tone neutral. "No," she replied, wiping away tears. "But I need you to stop Marcus. Not protect me, not bring me back into the fold. Just make him stop, please." The line went quiet for a long moment, and Alyssa held her breath, waiting. Lucas reached over and squeezed her hand, offering silent support as she waited for her father's response. The sound of motorcycles filled the quiet suburban street as the Hell's Angels rolled in, their chrome bikes gleaming under the streetlights. Alyssa watched from her living room window as her father's men dismounted, their leather cuts bearing the familiar Death's head patch. They moved with purpose, spreading out across the street like a well-oiled machine. "You should stay inside," Lucas said, standing beside her. His voice trembled slightly, betraying his own fear despite his tough exterior. But before Alyssa could respond, Marcus's crew arrived in their cars, engines roaring. They poured out onto the street, armed and ready for a fight. Marcus himself stepped out of a black SUV, his face twisted with rage. "You brought Daddy's little army?" Marcus shouted toward the house. "Come on out, Alyssa. Let's settle this once and for all." Lucas moved toward the door, but Alyssa grabbed his arm. "Don't," she pleaded. "They'll kill you." "I can't just stand here and do nothing," he said, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to protect her, but the scale of violence unfolding before them was beyond anything he'd faced before. The first punch was thrown by one of Marcus's men, and chaos erupted. The street became a battlefield as the two gangs clashed. The sound of breaking glass and flesh hitting flesh filled the air. Alyssa watched in horror as men she'd known since childhood, her father's soldiers, fought with the brutality she'd tried so hard to escape. Lucas paced behind her like a caged animal, torn between his instinct to protect and his fear of the violence. "We can't just stay in here forever," he said. "What if they break in?" As if on cue, something crashed through their front window. Glass shattered across the floor, and Lucas immediately moved to shield Alyssa. But the sudden movement drew attention from outside. Marcus spotted them through the broken window. "There you are," he snarled, starting toward the house. Lucas didn't hesitate. Despite Alyssa's protests, he rushed outside to intercept Marcus. "Stay back," he warned, positioning himself between Marcus and the house. "Look at you playing hero," Marcus sneered. He swung without warning, catching Lucas in the jaw. Lucas stumbled but stayed on his feet. He managed to block Marcus's next punch and landed one of his own, but he was outnumbered. Two of Marcus's men grabbed him from behind. "No!" Alyssa screamed as Marcus began pummeling Lucas. She ran outside, desperate to help, but strong arms held her back. One of her father's men, trying to keep her safe. Blood streamed from Lucas's nose as he struggled against his captors. His eyes met Alyssa's, filled with pain and determination. "Run!" he shouted between blows. "Just run!" But Alyssa couldn't move. She watched helplessly as the violence escalated around her. The peaceful life she'd built, the quiet existence she'd carved out for herself, it was all crumbling before her eyes. And now Lucas, the one person who'd stood by her through everything, was paying the price for her past. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone had called the police. The fighting continued, but Alyssa barely noticed. All she could see was Lucas, slumped between Marcus's men, blood dripping from his face. This wasn't the life she wanted. This wasn't the life Lucas deserved. Her father's protection, Marcus's obsession, the constant threat of violence. It had to end. As she watched Lucas struggle to stand, Alyssa felt something inside her break. She couldn't keep living like this, waiting for the next fight, the next threat, the next person to get hurt because of her. The early morning sun filtered through the curtains of Lucas's room as Alyssa changed his bandages. Her hands shook slightly as she worked, careful not to disturb the ugly bruise that spread across his ribs. The fight from the night before had left its mark on him, a split lip, bruised knuckles, and the painful reminder that their lives weren't truly their own. "You don't have to do this," Lucas mumbled, wincing as she applied antiseptic to a cut on his forearm. "Yes, I do," Alyssa replied softly. "This happened because of me." She finished wrapping the gauze and sat back in her chair, studying the young man who had become like family to her. Lucas looked so young and vulnerable lying there, trying to hide his pain behind a brave face. The sight made her heart ache. "None of this is your fault," Lucas insisted, pushing himself up to sitting position despite the obvious discomfort. "Marcus is the one who—" "It's all of it," Alyssa cut him off, standing up to pace the small guest room. "My father, the Hell's Angels, Marcus. It's a cycle that won't end as long as we stay here." She paused by the window, watching a neighbor walk their dog like it was just another normal morning. "I can't keep putting you in danger like this." Lucas's face hardened. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise to protect you." "And look what that got you." Alyssa gestured to his injuries. "You're 17, Lucas. You deserve a real life, not—" She waved her hand vaguely. "Not this constant fear and violence." "So do you," he said quietly. The words hit Alyssa like a physical blow. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, the truth of it washing over her. For so long she'd been running from her past, trying to build a normal life. But her father's world kept pulling her back in, like quicksand she couldn't escape. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "about what happens next, about what we both deserve." Lucas watched her intently, waiting. "We need to leave," Alyssa continued. "Not just this house, but this whole life. We need to go somewhere far away, where nobody knows us. Where there are no gangs, no violence, no shadows from the past following us around." "Your father won't let you just disappear," Lucas pointed out. "He won't have a choice." Alyssa's voice grew stronger with conviction. "I'm done letting other people control my life. I'm done being afraid." She turned to face Lucas fully. "We'll start fresh, somewhere peaceful, where we can both heal and build something better." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Where would we go?" "I have some money saved," Alyssa said. "Enough to get us started somewhere new. Maybe up north or out west, somewhere with mountains and open spaces. Somewhere nothing like here." A small smile tugged at Lucas's lips, despite his injuries. "Just like that? We pack up and disappear?" "Just like that," Alyssa nodded, feeling lighter than she had in years. "No more looking over our shoulders, no more violence, no more being pawns in someone else's game. We make our own family, our own peace." Lucas reached out and squeezed her hand. "When do we leave?" "As soon as you're well enough to travel," Alyssa squeezed back, her eyes filling with tears of relief and hope. "We're going to be free, Lucas. Really, truly free." Alyssa stood in her father's dimly lit office, the familiar scent of leather and cigarette smoke hanging heavy in the air. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, and motorcycle memorabilia decorated every surface. Her father, Hugh Ford, sat behind his massive desk, his weathered face unreadable as he studied her. "So, you're running away again," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "I'm not running, Dad." Alyssa's hands were steady at her sides, her chin lifted. "I'm choosing to live my life away from all this violence, away from the fear." Hugh leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his weight. His salt and pepper hair caught the light from his desk lamp, casting shadows across his face. "The world out there isn't any safer, Alyssa. You, of all people, should know that." "Maybe not," she agreed, "but at least it won't be filled with gang wars and revenge. Lucas and I deserve better than this." At the mention of Lucas's name, Hugh's expression hardened. "The boy was sent to protect you." "And he has," Alyssa said firmly. "But now we're protecting each other by leaving. We're making our own choices." Hugh stood up slowly, his massive frame towering over the desk. In his leather vest covered with patches, he looked every bit the intimidating gang leader he was. But Alyssa saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been pride, or perhaps regret. "You're just like your mother," he said quietly. "She never wanted this life either." The mention of her mother made Alyssa's throat tight. She was right to want something different. Hugh walked around his desk, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. He stopped in front of Alyssa, and for a moment she saw past the hardened exterior to the father who had once read her bedtime stories. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I can't tell you that," Alyssa replied. "We need a clean break, a fresh start where no one knows us." Hugh nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. "Marcus won't stop looking for you." "Let him look." Alyssa's voice was steel. "We'll be long gone, and this time we're not leaving a trail." Father and daughter stood in silence, years of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Hugh reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Take it," he said, holding it out to her. "Don't argue. It's clean money, from your mother's life insurance. I've been saving it for you." Alyssa hesitated before taking the envelope. It felt heavy in her hands, heavy with possibility, and the weight of goodbye. "This is it, Dad," she said softly. "No more watching over me. No more sending people to protect me. Let me go." Hugh's face remained stoic, but his voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "You'll always be my daughter." "I know," Alyssa whispered. She reached up and kissed his cheek, the scratch of his beard familiar against her skin. "Goodbye, Dad." Back at her house, Lucas was carefully packing their belongings into duffel bags. Each item they chose represented a step toward their new life. Clothes, important documents, a few precious photographs. The rest they would leave behind. Alyssa watched as Lucas zipped up the last bag, his movements careful due to his injuries. The bruises on his face were starting to fade, but the determination in his eyes was stronger than ever. "Ready?" he asked, looking up at her. Alyssa nodded, taking one last look around the living room that had been her sanctuary for so long. The walls that had witnessed her fears, her tears, and finally, her decision to break free. The small moving truck rattled to a stop in front of a modest white house with blue shutters. Alyssa turned off the engine and sat for a moment, taking in their new home. The street was quiet, lined with maple trees that swayed gently in the autumn breeze. Next door, a woman watered her flower garden, waving cheerfully as she noticed them. Lucas shifted in the passenger seat, his bruises still visible but healing. "It looks normal," he said, a hint of wonder in his voice. "That's exactly what we need right now," Alyssa replied, squeezing his hand. "Normal." They climbed out of the truck, their footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. The house wasn't fancy, just a simple one-story with a wraparound porch and a small yard, but to Alyssa, it looked like paradise. No cameras watching their every move, no suspicious cars driving by, no constant looking over their shoulders. "Let's get started," Lucas said, already heading for the back of the truck. Despite his injured shoulder, he insisted on helping. Alyssa watched him, noting how his movements were careful, but determined. They spent the afternoon moving boxes and arranging furniture. Their belongings were few. They'd left most things behind, not wanting any connections to their old life. But somehow that made it feel more like a fresh start. The kitchen came together first. Alyssa unpacked dishes while Lucas assembled a small table and chairs. The sound of plates clinking and drawers sliding felt wonderfully ordinary. Through the window, she could see children riding bikes down the street, their laughter carrying on the wind. "I got us something," Lucas said, pulling a small package from his backpack. He handed it to Alyssa, looking slightly embarrassed. Inside was a welcome mat with a simple design of leaves and branches. "Our first house thing," Alyssa smiled, running her fingers over the pattern. She placed it carefully by the front door, straightening it until it was just right. As the day wore on, their new home slowly took shape. They hung curtains in the windows, made up beds with fresh sheets, and arranged their few photographs on empty shelves. Each item they unpacked felt like another step away from their past. In the late afternoon, they took a break, sitting on the porch steps with cups of coffee. The street was peaceful, with only the occasional car passing by. A neighbor across the way was walking his dog, and somewhere nearby, a lawn mower hummed. "Do you think we'll be okay here?" Lucas asked quietly, staring into his cup. Alyssa looked at him, this brave, wounded boy who had become family. "I think we already are," she said. "We're together, we're safe, and that's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The air grew cooler, and the streetlights flickered on one by one. From inside their new home, a lamp glowed warmly through the curtains they'd hung together. Lucas leaned back on his elbows, looking more relaxed than Alyssa had ever seen him. "It feels different here," he said, "like we can breathe." Alyssa nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The weight they'd both carried for so long felt lighter somehow, as if they'd left it behind with the rest of their old lives. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but full of possibility, and for the first time in years, that uncertainty didn't feel threatening. The morning sun filtered through the cafe's large windows as Alyssa tied her apron around her waist. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air, and the gentle chatter of early customers created a soothing backdrop. She smiled at her reflection in the polished coffee machine. She looked different now, more relaxed, with a sparkle in her eyes that had been missing for years. "Morning, Alyssa," called Sarah, the cafe owner, a kind-faced woman in her 50s. "Could you help stock the display case? The morning rush will be here soon." "Of course," Alyssa replied, carefully arranging muffins and croissants behind the glass. The familiar routine brought her comfort. It had been 3 weeks since they'd arrived in town, and already the cafe felt like a second home. During her break, she sat at a corner table and texted Lucas. He was out job hunting again, determined to contribute to their new life. Despite his age, he carried himself with such maturity that most people assumed he was older. His latest lead was at the local hardware store, where the owner needed help with inventory and deliveries. "Got the job," Lucas's text made her smile. "Start Monday. The owner seems nice." Alyssa felt a warmth spread through her chest. They were doing it, actually building a normal life. The cafe's regulars had already taken to her, often asking about her day and sharing small bits of their lives. It felt good to be known as just Alyssa, the friendly barista, rather than Hugh Ford's daughter or Marcus's ex-wife. That evening, she walked home under a sky painted in soft pinks and oranges. Their little house came into view, and she noticed Lucas had mowed the lawn. He sat on the porch steps, waiting for her with a proud grin. "I made dinner," he announced as she approached. "Well, I tried to. It might be a little burnt." Inside, the kitchen showed signs of his culinary adventure. A slightly smoky smell lingered, and dishes were piled in the sink. But on the table sat 2 plates of spaghetti, complete with garlic bread that was indeed a little charred. "It's perfect," Alyssa said, and she meant it. They sat down to eat, sharing stories about their day. Lucas talked excitedly about his new job, his eyes bright with possibility. "You know," he said between bites, "Mrs. Martinez next door invited us to her barbecue this weekend. She says the whole neighborhood comes." Alyssa paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. In their old life, invitations usually meant danger. But here, in this quiet town, a neighborhood barbecue was just that. Neighbors sharing food and conversation. "We should go," she said softly. "It would be nice to meet everyone." After dinner, they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset. The evening air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of someone's flowering jasmine. A few houses down, children played basketball in their driveway. The sound of their laughter floated over on the breeze. Alyssa looked at Lucas, who was absorbed in a book about home repairs. He'd already started making plans to fix up their house, talking about painting the shutters and planting a vegetable garden. She felt tears prick at her eyes, happy tears for once. This was what she'd always wanted but never thought she could have. A real home, a family bound not by blood, but by choice, and the freedom to just be. Here, there were no shadows lurking around corners, no constant fear tightening her chest. Just the simple pleasure of existing in a place where they belonged. Later that afternoon, Lucas stopped by the cafe, his work clothes dusty from his new construction job. He'd found work with a local contractor who didn't ask too many questions about his past. The older man had simply seen Lucas's eagerness to learn and his strong work ethic. "Hey," he said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Busy day?" Alyssa grabbed a glass and filled it with ice water. "The usual morning rush, but it's calmed down now." She placed the water in front of him, noticing the honest tiredness in his expression. So different from the haunted exhaustion he used to carry. "Mrs. Martinez invited us over for dinner this weekend," Lucas mentioned, taking a long drink. "She says we can't keep eating takeout all the time." Alyssa laughed, the sound coming easily now. Their elderly neighbor had taken them under her wing almost immediately, bringing over home-cooked meals and offering motherly advice. "She's probably right, though I'm getting better at cooking." "Yeah, you haven't set off the smoke alarm in at least a week," Lucas teased. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a fresh batch of cookies. "Lucas, honey, you look like you've been working hard. Take some cookies home. On the house." "Thanks, Sarah," he said, his face brightening. Alyssa watched the interaction with warmth in her heart. This was what normal felt like. Genuine kindness from strangers turned friends, inside jokes, and simple moments that didn't carry the weight of fear or danger. That evening, they sat in their small but cozy living room. Lucas had insisted on getting a few plants to make it homier, and now potted ferns and succulents dotted the windowsills. A soft breeze carried the scent of their neighbor's flowering jasmine through the open window. "Remember when we first got here?" Lucas asked, sprawled on their second-hand couch. "You jumped every time a car door slammed." Alyssa nodded, curled up in the armchair they'd found at a local thrift store. "And you insisted on checking all the windows and doors 3 times before bed." She paused, realizing something. "I can't remember the last time I did that." "Me neither," Lucas admitted. He sat up straighter, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, I saw a guy who looked kind of like Marcus at the hardware store today." "Oh?" Alyssa felt her heart remain steady, surprising herself. "Yeah. Last month, that would have sent me into panic mode. But today?" He shrugged. "I just grabbed what I needed and left. Didn't even think about it until now." Alyssa understood exactly what he meant. The shadows of their past had lost their power to terrify. They were just memories now, growing fainter with each passing day. A burst of laughter from next door filtered through the window, the Martinez kids playing in their backyard. The sound mixed with the distant bark of dogs, the hum of evening traffic, and all the other ordinary noises of their new neighborhood. "We did it, didn't we?" Alyssa said softly. "We actually made it out." Lucas grinned, that bright, unguarded smile that had become more frequent lately. "Yeah, we did. Who would have thought, huh?" They shared a look of understanding, both recognizing how far they'd come from that first terrifying encounter on Alyssa's doorstep. The fear and violence that had defined their lives for so long felt like a distant storm that had finally passed, leaving behind clear skies and the promise of better days ahead. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the front lawn of their modest home. Alyssa leaned against the porch railing, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. Next to her, Lucas sat on the wooden steps, his work boots still covered in sawdust from the construction site. "Hard to believe it's been 6 months already," Alyssa said softly, watching as the clouds drifted lazily overhead. The peaceful neighborhood stretched out before them, so different from the chaos they'd left behind. Lucas nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all just a dream." He glanced up at her with a small smile. "But then I remember where we are, and it feels real." The gentle breeze carried the scent of Mrs. Martinez's roses from next door. The elderly neighbor had taken them under her wing from the moment they'd arrived, bringing over homemade tamales and sharing stories about her own journey to build a new life. "You know," Alyssa said, setting her mug on the railing, "I used to think peace wasn't possible for people like us, that we'd always be running or looking over our shoulders." Lucas stood up, brushing off his jeans. "I know what you mean. After my dad died, I thought I'd never belong anywhere." He paused, watching a pair of birds chase each other across the dimming sky. "But this place, it feels different." Alyssa thought about the cafe where she worked, about her regular customers who greeted her by name and shared pieces of their lives over coffee. She thought about Lucas's boss, who was teaching him the construction trade with patience and respect. "We built this," she said quietly. "Together." The sunset's final rays stretched across their small garden, where they'd planted vegetables and flowers. Each seed represented a hope for the future, a belief that they could put down roots and watch something beautiful grow. "Remember that first night?" Lucas asked, his voice gentle. "When you let me stay?" Alyssa nodded, memories of that rainy evening flooding back. "I was so scared then. Of Marcus, of my father's world, of everything really." "Look at us now," Lucas said, gesturing to their home. It wasn't fancy. The paint was peeling in places, and the screen door needed fixing. But it was theirs. Safe. Real. The sky deepened to purple, stars beginning to peek through the gathering dusk. A car drove past slowly, the driver waving. They waved back, no longer startling at every passing vehicle or unexpected sound. "I never thought I'd have this," Alyssa admitted, wrapping her arms around herself as the evening air grew cooler. "A real home, neighbors who care, a chance to just live." Lucas stepped closer, his presence steady and reassuring. "We deserve this, you know. Both of us." His voice carried the weight of conviction, of lessons hard learned but finally understood. The last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving behind a peaceful twilight. Crickets began their evening chorus, and porch lights flickered on up and down the street. "Should we head in?" Lucas asked, holding the screen door open. "I think there's still some of Mrs. Martinez's banana bread left." Alyssa smiled, picking up her now empty mug. She took one last look at the darkening sky, at the quiet street, at the life they'd built from the ashes of their past. Then she turned toward the warm light spilling from their doorway, ready to step inside. "I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day."